Okay, so hello and welcome to GoGecko and Granite IR35 webinar, where we hope you will feel a lot clearer and a lot more definite about your plans for surviving IR35. My name's Helen Vane. I am the director and founder of GoGecko Recruitment. We supply contractors and permanent staff across the project management space in Sussex, and we also support SME businesses, almost like an internal resource for them, again, recruiting staff at varying levels. We're also joined by Joel from Granite. Joel, do you want to introduce yourself?
My name is Joel. I run a company called Granite BPO with three partners. We are an outsourced employment and payroll provider. So traditionally you'd call us an umbrella company. We generally don't use that term too much anymore, but yes, essentially we're an umbrella company. We've been working very closely with IR35, me for sort of 19 years or so now. And we've obviously, this is a big culmination of that work. And we've been working very closely with recruitment agencies in terms of getting their delivery right, lots of clients and end clients as well in terms of how they can structure the business after IR35. And then dealing with lots of contractors and freelancers, lots of queries and questions about whether they can carry on using their company or not. And obviously we'll always try and help them where we can. And then offering a payroll solution for them if they can't use their company. So hopefully it's all encompassing. But yeah, IR35 has been my life certainly certainly the last 6 months, but I mean, a lot longer than that as well.
Thank you, Joel. And can you give us a bit of an overview of what IR35 actually is and who it's really going to affect?
Sure. Okay. So if there's anyone left who doesn't know, so IR35 is, it's about people claiming to be in business for themselves or self-employed when actually the role that they're doing is that of an employee. That's the long and the short of it. So obviously if you're self-employed, you're responsible for your own tax and national insurance, and the place where you're working isn't going to be paying any employer's national insurance for you. So really I would say that now that the tax on dividends has changed massively, IR35 is really about employers' national insurance and the collecting of employers' national insurance. Because if there's an employee-employer relationship, somebody should be paying employers' national insurance. And that's worth £3.5 billion something a year to the Treasury. And so for years, the IR35 has been in place, but I recently heard that it was something like it costs, they would get back £30,000 for each individual company that they went after, but the investigation could end up costing them on average £38,000. So they never had any teeth to go after the individual limited companies. There's never any point in doing it, even though the rules still applied. So what they've done is they've changed it now so that the actual client or the place you're working, or sometimes a recruitment agency as well, will be responsible for making an assessment and paying the tax if it's found out that you're incorrectly working as a self-employed person or through a limited company when you actually should be an employee of the place you're working. So we've obviously seen lots of places do big blanket bans, which HMRC have said should happen, but we have seen it happen. And then everybody else is now kind of desperately trying to see whether they're inside or outside. Some people it's really easy, like 2 questions and you go, yeah, sorry, you're an employee. Some people it's an hour and a half later and you're still going, maybe. And so it's really dependent on the role and the relationship you have. And there isn't one magic bullet. So people will say, oh, what about if I change this in the contract? Or what about if we do the contract so it looks like this, or change this wording? And that's not what it's about. No one's found a way that just gives you a little loophole that you can jump through by changing some wording. So it really is about the relationship and looking at the relationship about whether you're an employee or not. And that's essentially why IR35 is about and why the changes are happening, and that takes us up to where we are now. So it's coming in on the 1st of April, essentially.
Brilliant. Thank you, Joel. I just wondered, one of my clients has asked, what is IR35 going to mean as an obligation from businesses to contractors? So as an end client, what is their obligation to their current contractors and anyone new that they bring on? What's the process they need to go through?
Okay, so if the contractor wants to work through a limited company, so if you take on a role and say, I'd like to invoice as a company, then the client is responsible for checking the status of that worker. So they'll be able to, so sometimes you don't need a tool because it's obvious whether they're an employee or not. But if it's borderline, then there's a HMRC tool, which allows you to put in all the details of the contract, and it'll give you your status determination of whether you're inside or outside of IR35. It is quite heavily weighted towards finding everybody inside. There are some clauses in there which I think are only theoretical as opposed to practical, things like sending a replacement or providing a substitute. But yeah, so it's the actual client's responsibility to do that, and they can say, I'm sorry, but we're not happy with you working in this contract as a company, so we would need you to work either on a PAYE basis or through a payroll intermediary like me.
Okay, and so I get that it's the client's responsibility to look at that for the contractor.
Yeah.
But if the contractor is adamant that they don't want to, they want to work outside IR35 and maintain their limited company status, what are the options for them?
Well, I mean, there will be contracts probably outside IR35. You might find that they become slim pickings eventually as the culture changes. There has been talk of a small company exemption. So again, I think if the company has less than 50 employees, there's talk about it not having to make the determination. It doesn't mean you still technically should be a company if you're an employee, but it means that the company would be exempt from it. We're waiting for some clarification on that because it was hinted it was going to be 50 companies, and then the review came out like an hour ago. It doesn't seem to cover it, so I may have missed it. I've got to read it again, but we are waiting for clarification on exactly the size of the company and whether or not it's time basis. So it might be that small companies have an exemption for 12 months or 24 months, and then they'll roll it out to everybody. So yeah, so you could work for a small company if you still wanted to, but I think what will happen is overall the culture will change and it will just be gradually phased out. So more and more companies will go, you know what, I just think we just say everybody has to be PAYE or umbrella, and it will probably whittle away the opportunities that you get. I don't know. I mean, that's a prediction.
And what's the kind of noise in the market from the point of view of contractors renegotiating their rate to encompass any umbrella costs that they, their tax and national insurance, etc., that they maybe haven't been paying in the same way up until now?
Sure. Well, if you look at a contractor, it's massively different depending on the rate. So if you're on £150 a day, you might only be worse off by 5-10%. If you're on £1,000 a day, you're worse off by 25-30%. The differences are huge. So again, there is no one simple answer to that question, because I've worked with some clients who have just said straight up they are not paying a single penny extra per day to workers who are switching from their own limited company to umbrella. Your rate is your rate. It's not changing. The tax that you pay is down to you essentially. So that I think will be very common. I have seen some instances where the worker's been able to go back and renegotiate it and ask for a slightly higher pay rate, and obviously you're free to negotiate and the company is free to tell you yes or no either way, and so good luck. But I think what will more likely to happen is you'll get a very steady inflation. So people whose contract runs out in May or June or July, you might find that the next time they go for a contract, if they were charging £400 a day, maybe now they'll charge £420 a day, and they'll go in at that kind of rate. So that will probably happen. But I would say generally, most clients aren't going to increase daily rates, and I think you have to be prepared for that. And I think you have to be prepared that your take home will be less than it was through going forwards after April, so between 10 and 25%, depending on your level of pay.
Okay. I had another question from a client saying, what if the contractor lives abroad but contracts for a UK company? And I think this was around a case whereby the person had lived in Spain for a number of years and has actually been contracting for that company for a number of years.
Yeah, so that's a good question, because obviously if the company that you're working for isn't UK based, they don't have to adhere to HMRC's guidelines. So if you've got a company in Spain, they want to take on a contractor through a limited company, that's absolutely fine. The risk then still sits with the worker, as it's always done, and the individual company. And so you will have the same situation. As I said, the average clawback of owed tax would be £30,000. It's cost them £38,000 to investigate you, so you're probably never going to get investigated. Yeah, I would say that in that case, then you can carry on doing it, because the company in Spain, unless they have a UK presence, aren't going to probably be bothered about the HMRC's guidelines on who can and can't use a limited company. So yeah, probably crack on.
Okay, brilliant. And another question from a client actually: what if a contractor has an accident at work? What is the business liability for that contractor? I don't know whether you know the answer to that question.
Yeah, well, so there's different types of insurances. You've got employer's liability and public liability. So if somebody has an accident on your premises, then generally, regardless of that will fall under their employers or their public liability. If you're injured in the course of your duty, so let's say you're a social worker and you're punched in the face by somebody you're social working, then that would be employer's liability. So again, that's who the employer is. If they're using a limited company, then the limited company would have to have its own insurance. An umbrella company will always have employer's liability. So if you're working through Granite, then you will be covered for that, and all your insurances are covered automatically and covered in the margin. And if you're working on site at a company, for a big company, then generally they'll do it. So yeah, there's a number of different people in the chain, but essentially somebody should have employer's liability insurance to cover you if you get injured on site, or public liability if you're injured, if you trip over something in their building.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you for that, Joel. And if a contractor is working through an agency, who is responsible for that contractor's tax and liabilities, etc.?
This is the most asked question.
Funny that.
Especially at recruitment agencies, they all want to know. When I go to see recruitment agencies, they all want to know: is it us or is it the client? Now, unless I've missed it, and I'm happy to hold my hands up if I have missed it, this hasn't been clarified. So for me, it's the determination is who's the employer, and that's who's liable. So let's say you've got you're working at a company, you're working at, I don't know, a large bank, say, and they're acting as your employer or they're being the employer, but your money is being paid to an agency first. They're taking their margin and then they're paying you. So I think, first of all, it's the responsibility of everybody in that pay chain to make sure that the person is inside or outside IR35. I don't think you can wash your hands of it and go, well, we're an agency, we don't deal with it. Or the end client can go, well, we're using an agency, so we don't have to deal with it. It may take a test case, which is probably 2-3 years away, where somebody has said, well, we're a recruitment agency, so, we let them decide. Or likewise, the company said, we paid through an agency, so we didn't care if they were a limited company or not. I think it's everyone's responsibility. It's the agency and the client. Only the client can make the determination, because they're the ones who are, they have the worker on site and they're the ones setting the worker tasks. Only they can say whether that worker is their employee or not. So ultimately, it's down to them. But I think if you're a recruitment agency and you're paying the wages, then you absolutely have to be involved in that process and make sure that you're also covered by working together with the client to both determine the status. Yes, it's a vague answer. I'm sorry on that, but I mean, again, unless I've missed some really fine details in the review, that I would say that is yet to be clarified until there's a test.
I guess what you're saying is, if the contractor is working through an agency for whatever reason, we have a responsibility to ensure that we know what the client is intending that contractor to do and what their status is within that client, so that we can then advise accordingly. And I suspect the client, because of IR35 and because of how how definite it is, that the client will know whether that contractor needs to work inside IR35 or outside IR35, depending on the project or the length of contract, etc.
Well, it would be, let's say you've placed a worker into a company. And they've said, I'd like to use be paid through my limited company. Then you and the client should then have that conversation, say, this worker is going to be paid through a limited company. Do you do the assessment and then share the data with me, and I'll do the assessment, and we'll work on it together, and we'll decide that, if you both decide that contract is outside IR35, then great, have it saved somewhere, have proof of documentation it's run through. Now, let's say that company has an investigation 4 years down the line, and they said, right, you had 1,000 people working here, we think they're all employees. What is most likely to happen in those cases is that there'd be a second. That the company would just say, okay, here's £1 million or £500,000. You're right, you got us. If because they're not going to come after individuals. But I mean, if they do and they start looking at individuals, then if that client holds up, says, "Hey, hang on a minute, we paid them through a recruitment agency. It's nothing to do with us. We just paid some money over. We didn't know that they were a limited company." Then they might win that case. If that goes to court and you had to stand up there and say, "Well, it was their decision," I can't guarantee you'd win or lose that case, or they'd win or lose that case. So that's what I'm saying. Until there's a test case, you don't know what kind of who's got the best lawyer, maybe.
Okay.
So that's my view. That's what I think. I think that you both have to work together and agree the status.
Okay. And I've got a question from Jennifer, actually. It's that she's asked, if a client wants to engage a contractor for a fixed number of days for a specific project, is she right in thinking that this still lies outside IR35?
It's all about the relationship between the place of work and the worker. So, I mean, the length of the contract and fixed things are important, and you can take those into account. But really, it's about the relationship. So when you are on site or when you're doing the job for that company, is there someone senior there directing you? Is someone who says, "Okay, come sit down here. This is what I need you to do for me. Here's the task for you to do. Let me know when you finish, and I'll give you something else." Right? They're your employee. Even if they're there for 3 or 4 days. Now, let me give an example. An example we've got. We're really good at copywriters. So we work with a recruitment agency who place copywriters, and a company will say, "I need some copy for this marketing campaign or this page of the website, and I'm prepared to pay £1,000 for this copy." So that copywriter will do it in their own time. They'll do it at home using their own computer, and then they'll email it from Brian at Brian's Copywriting Limited to the company and send them an invoice for £1,000. Now that's someone who is absolutely outside IR35. They've done everything autonomously. They've done it in their own time. They've used all their own equipment, and they've priced it for the job. So that is someone outside of IR35. That's one of my go-to examples of somebody who is fine, because at no point were they sitting there. Now, if that company said, "Our in-house copywriter is on long-term sick or is on maternity leave. I want a copywriter to come in and just generally do copywriting for us." And Brian turns up and says, "Right, I'm Brian's copywriting services, and I'm going to sit here." As they send him jobs to do throughout the days and the weeks and send things over his desk, and he does them as they come in, his status is now one of an employee because he's working for them as they tell him what to do. And so it's really fine lines, and someone could even argue both of those points as well. But it's really fine differences in terms of how your status is and the role that you're doing, and about the relationship you have with them. Like, I think you'll know on site whether you have a boss and you're an employee, or whether you're entirely in business for yourself and you're acting in an autonomous way and you're doing your own tasks. Another good example is things like network engineering. So you might hire a company to come and put in a new server and re-network your office. Now, there's probably no one in that company who understands what any of this stuff is. You're not standing there going, "Right, I need you to put some Cat6 cables through here," or "I'd like 4 of these servers and I want them." You don't tell them to do that. You hire someone to come in and do it, and they will say, "Right, I'm going to do all of this. It's going to cost you 20 grand in kit. It's going to cost you 4 grand in labour, and I'll be able to do it on the 1st of April." Right? That's someone who's self-employed. And so, there are opportunities for people to be outside of IR35, and it's about the relationship. And again, I think that you chat through the scenario, chat through what you'll be doing on site and what your role looks like. I think very quickly, you don't need to be massively qualified to be able to go, "Oh, I reckon you're an employee," or I reckon you're in business for yourself. And that's one of the key terms. To use a limited company, you have to be in business for yourself. You have to be your own business, and as you and run a business, not an employee of someone else.
So with regards to kind of determining that, are there some kind of, you've given some really great examples of people kind of sitting outside IR35. Is there kind of some criteria? So you've mentioned a boss, you've mentioned like using the company's equipment and maybe having the company's own email address. So it would be like, I don't know, I could be working for GlaxoSmithKline, for example, and I would be Helen at GlaxoSmithKline instead of Helen at limitedcompany.com.
Yes, that's a good example. Yeah. I mean, there is no one gotcha, and there's no, "Oh, if you do this one thing, you'll be outside of IR35. It isn't that simple. But yeah, I mean, as you just said, I mean, I think they're great examples. So do you have someone senior who instructs you and tells you what to do? Are you working your own hours, or if you go in at 9 o'clock and you leave at 5:30 and take a lunch, and got told off if you came in an hour late, or like that, you know if you have a boss or not, right? And if you have a boss, you're not in company for yourself. I've had IT workers say, "Oh, I don't have to stop using my limited company, but my boss told me I have to." You go, "Well, there you go." Like, I mean, that's your point, right? I mean, it's you have a boss. It's you aren't in business for yourself, and that's the key thing. It's about, are you in business for yourself, or are you working for that company as an employee?
Great, John.
There's something called the HMRC CES tool, which will always seems to fall on the side of the HMRC, and that you are inside, but that's worth having a look at. There is another one called IR35 Shield, which is done from a company on the other side. That will give you like a traffic light system that says this is good, this is bad, this is this is average, these are the changes that you could make, or this is what you need to do. That's also worth having a look at as well. They're a bit more independent from HMRC, and that will give you an idea. But I mean, I'm happy to help as well. So you can email me or give me a call, and I will do my best to put you in the right direction as well.
Thank you, Joel. We have another question from Peter. He's asked, if you were to work under the IR35 rules, how does this affect your requirement to do a tax return?
Okay, so if you're inside IR35 and working through an umbrella company and you're paying full tax and national insurance, then for that, it's like having a normal job and you don't need to do a tax return, unless you need to do a tax return for other reasons, such as you rent out a property, or you're a director of a company. So, but essentially, an umbrella company and those and organisations like that act as an employer. So on a personal tax return, it would go on as an employment supplement. So this is my employer, this is a POA reference number, and these are the figures from my P60. That's how an umbrella company works. If you're outside of IR35, then and you're billing as a company, then obviously that doesn't change. However you currently do your self-assessment would be the same. However you draw down your income from the company, and that's obviously there's 1,000 ways you can pay yourself from your own limited company, so dividends and so forth. So as however you do it now, would be the same.
So working under an umbrella company, if I'm correct, is like being an employee.
Yes.
Because you deal with all the tax, NI, everything else. You get a pay slip at the end of the day.
Yes. If you just work through an umbrella company and you don't have any other reasons to do a tax return, you don't have to do a tax return. You just get a P60 at the end of the year. All the RTI goes over to HMRC to say this is what you've earned and tax you've paid. So there's no need to report anything on the tax return. And the amount you get paid through is final. So there's no end of year tax. There's no tax in advance. What you get paid to your account on a Friday morning is your wages.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Joel. I think we've got some other questions. What is the difference between a sole trader and a limited company contractor, and how does IR35 affect that?
They're both the same from my point of view. So, IR35 always was about people being self-employed, but also catches limited companies. So it's the same thing. I mean, you can't be an employee of a company and rock up the next day and go, "Oh, I'm self-employed now." It just because then the company will no longer have to pay employers' national insurance for you. You do your own tax return, you don't pay tax, and put through your expenses, and that's kind of what IR35 is there to do. If you imagine you had a company with 50 employees and they all rocked up the next day and said they were self-employed, your employer's national insurance bill has just gone from being 100 grand a year to nothing. So HMRC loses that money. So that's why IR35 exists. It stops people claiming to be in business for themselves or a self-employed contractor when actually the task they're doing is that to an employee. So for me, sole trader, self-employed, limited company, it's all the same thing when we're talking about IR35. Obviously, it's not the same tax-wise, but it's the same when we're talking about IR35. It catches all of it.
And what have you seen in the market? Because I'm on your page and I get that, but have you seen kind of other people seeing that differently? Because sole traders in pure sense seem to fall outside the new legislation. Have you seen that happen with clients where they've gone, "Oh, we'll just take on some sole traders and then we'll be able to swerve IR35"?
Yeah, I think I saw it mentioned once that there was that was being mentioned. Again, I'm not the legal opinion on these things, and you may have your own legal advice on it. But for me, if you call HMRC and register to be self-employed, they'll ask you what they're doing. And if you say, well, I'm doing the same job I always did, now I'm self-employed, I work in a supermarket, stack shelves. Then they say, well, no, you're an employee of Tesco. You can't just be self-employed. You're not. Your role as an employee. So switching to be a sole trader for me absolutely does not put you outside of IR35. It's almost the exact opposite. It's exactly the same status determination. You're claiming to be self-employed when you are an employee of the company. And of course, you really are self-employed. But whether you've incorporated yourself into a company or whether you are a sole trader acting as your name, then I don't see a difference. I really don't. And I think that if you think that taking your limited company people and making them sole traders, and I have been asked this question, gets you around IR35, I would suggest you get some advice on that, further advice, because from my point of view, it's absolutely not a magic bullet. If you could do that, it would be some pretty weak legislation, wouldn't it? If you could just go, just call yourself self-employed tomorrow, then boom, we've got around IR35. That was easy. Like all these years of consulting and pages and pages of documents and advice and things would be a hell of a loophole.
I think what HMRC have done they've differentiated between sole traders and limited companies, but actually they haven't clarified it maybe as well as they should have done, because I think that what they mean is like window cleaners or drivers or who sole traders who have their own businesses but they work for lots of different companies.
They use the term off payroll, so
yes, okay.
It's off payroll, so it's anybody who is not on your payroll essentially, or on payroll. So that for me does include self-employed people in limited companies, because you're not being paid through the company payroll or through any payroll. So obviously lots of self-employed people are genuinely in business for themselves. But as I said, if you work for a supermarket stacking shelves and you call up HMRC and say, right, I'd like to be self-employed to stack these shelves, they will tell you can't do it. They'll tell you, you're an employee of that supermarket and that supermarket has to pay employers' national insurance for you.
No, that does make sense. I think Jen's got another question for you, Joel.
Yep.
This is a numbers one. Hope you're ready.
No, go on.
She's asked if a contractor's earning $350 a day,
yeah,
and they ask an agency what the difference would be under the new IR35 regulations,
yeah,
can you give some guidance as to what this might be? And I know we've had this discussion, and I know you can't be completely accurate.
No, I can be. Luckily, I'm sat at a computer, so right. Let's just whack the figures in, right? So this is really basic, cigarette packet calculations, but assuming you're on a week 1 tax code, so that's not taking into account how many weeks a year you work, the first week of April, then the $350 a day is going to give you something like £1,065 take home. So I would say through your own limited company, if you're getting 75%, let's have a look, then you would have been getting something like 1312. So you are worse off by about £250 a week through following the IR35 legislation. That is, please don't quote me on that. That is throwing some figures out there very quickly. But yes, assuming you get 75% to your limited company, if you're doing everything properly and paying yourself dividends and a small salary and claiming minimal expenses, you've got things like fees and then through an umbrella company, I would guess you're £250 a week worse off. But I mean, that is, please don't quote me on that, and please don't send me angry emails saying take home would be much higher for our umbrella, or you said I was going to get this and I didn't.
We won't quote you, Joel.
Okay.
What I was going to ask you, actually, on that note, there may be contractors watching who are kind of inside IR35 within their current contracts, and actually, don't have a clue what an umbrella company does and how that benefits.
Yeah.
So, I just wondered if you could give us some clarification as to what an umbrella company does, why it's it's a benefit. Obviously they're going to lose some money, if that's a given, but what other things you do.
There are benefits. I mean, it's essentially what the umbrella company do. It will sit in the contract chain where your limited company currently sits. So your agency or end client will pay the umbrella company. The umbrella company will do all the invoicing and all the accounts, so it will raise the invoice and send it off to the agency or client. They'll pay the umbrella company, but the difference is the umbrella company will make all of the deductions for tax and national insurance. So as we talk about, it takes them from off payroll to on payroll because they're on the umbrella company's payroll. So the big difference is it'll take off employers' national insurance before it does anything else. So that's where you're kind of losing your 250 quid to employers' national insurance, basically. And then it'll take off tax and national insurance and pay you the net amount into your account. So you're losing the money on the employer's national insurance. That's the difference. Essentially, the tax is about the same, realistically, because of whether after you pay corporation tax and tax on your dividends, it's about the same as PAYE. The benefits are is you get paid a final amount. So the amount you get into your account on a Friday morning at the end of the month is all yours. No tax to pay, no tax in advance, no paying it from your company account to your personal account and talking the money around. You know what you've got is yours, and you can budget based on that, which I think is nice. You get permanent employee status. So what that means is that you're even though you're freelancing, you get all the benefits of freelancing. So you can chop and change jobs and do 3 months here and then take some time off and go and do interesting roles. Your umbrella company will give you an overarching contract of employment, and that's why it's called an umbrella, because it overarches all your contracts. And that means that if you go to apply for a mortgage, you say, well, I work for Granite and I am on £70,000 a year. Look, here's my employment contract. Here's my last 3 payslips. So suddenly getting a mortgage has gone from being, I need 3 years accounts, proof that your contract's going to be renewed. I need a letter from your accountant. You go, here's my last 3 payslips, or here's my P60 from paper. And suddenly those things get much easier to deal with. So that is an advantage. You also qualify for things like maternity pay. So that can be worth a couple of £1,000s to you because you get your first 6 weeks at 90% of your normal wage. Again, you do qualify for maternity pay through your own limited company if you've been using it long enough. But obviously, if you're paying yourself a small salary, then you don't really qualify for it based on the level you're earning. But through an umbrella company, because everything is salary, then your maternity pay is much, much higher, beneficial. You get sick pay, but that's not a lot. It's not really worth shouting about, but you qualify for sick pay. And so you get all of these extra benefits as well. It makes everything easier. Someone does the invoicing for you. Someone chases your invoices. You get paid. You get a pay slip. So if at any point your limited company has been, a burden, or you're like, I keep getting notes from company's house, I keep getting money out of this, my accountant needs me to send the receipts, then it might be a breath of fresh air just to go, put my timesheet in, I got paid at the end of the week. It's dead easy. So there is that, but as we've seen, it's definitely a change in your make or take time. You will be worse off. There is no getting around that.
And can you still be a limited company and be under an umbrella? So from the point of view of doing different contracts and saying, right, actually for this contract, I'm going to use my limited company, but I want to work for that client and they will only have me inside IR35. So can you be both?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing is that you'll know your role. Okay. So if you are the type of person, so, if you are an IT help desk engineer and you sit on a help desk and you take queries and you respond to queries, then you will never be outside IR35. So you probably should just wind your company up. If you've got a lot of money in there, you can do a voluntary liquidation, and that's a conversation for another day, but there are tax benefits to doing that. If you are borderline, like the copywriter we spoke earlier, and you really are inside and outside, then absolutely keep your company going. If you can use it, then great. If you can't, then don't. And all you've got to do is make sure that if you're paying yourself, whoever you do the most work for should generally give you tax-free allowance, and whoever you do the least amount of work for will put a BR tax code normally, or HMRC will send out individual tax codes to both parties. But yeah, absolutely, you can run both at the same time. Absolutely no problem with that at all. But you'll know the type of work you do, whether that's regularly going to be inside or outside.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Joel. And we have been running over now because we were going to do 30 minutes. It's now 34 minutes. And
I can talk all day.
About IR35.
Oh, yeah.
It's brilliant. You've been really, really helpful. If anyone's got any other questions, we're more than happy to answer them. I will send out a list to everyone who has registered to make sure that you've got all the information you need. So you, by all means, send back questions, and Joel has kindly said that he will answer them and be available as well, which is brilliant. On a kind of finishing note, Joel, your tips for getting IR35 ready for both contractors and businesses that are listening.
I mean, the first thing to do is you absolutely have to test the workforce. So you need to understand very clearly the rules, in terms of like whether they're in business themselves, all the things we talked about, and you need to make those assessments. Now, it's getting late, but it's a great chance to speak to your client. If you're an agency, it's a great chance to speak to your clients. Maybe you've not been in touch with them for a while, so you can go back and ask them what they've done, and can we work on this together. But make an assessment of each worker. If you're finding that your workers are generally falling inside IR35, then obviously you need to have a payroll solution ready for them for the start of April. That's exactly what we do and what we can help with. Or and you also need to make sure that the contract is set up correctly, because you might need to terminate the contract and do a new contract from the company to the employment to the umbrella company. Some places are offering fixed term contracts. So if you're a recruitment agency, there's a big issue with the idea of workers going on full time. You need to make sure that your contracts and your terms are absolutely bulletproof in terms of make sure you get paid for that. So make sure that's all done and in place. Again, a little bit quite late, but I think we've got to make sure that your terms and conditions are correct, so that if your workers end up going permanent, you're compensated for that, because that's going to be a big issue. I think that's going to be there's a sleeping giant of trouble brewing there when these places just go, we'll take these people on permanently. And agencies are going to have to make sure that they get compensated for that. And then I would make sure that you know what your take home looks like, and you've budgeted accordingly to know that actually, okay, I was on $350 a day, and I was getting this. What am I getting now? And obviously allow for that. I think, as I said, things about looking at winding your company up and whether you keep it in its dormant or not. If you are winding it up, then there's something called a voluntary liquidation. So if you've got 25, 30, 40,000 pounds saved in your account, you can take it all out at 10%. Again, it's not my area, but there's lots of companies out there that do that. So there are benefits to winding your company up and closing it down. Anything else? That's because so essentially it's about assessment at the minute. You need to know that everybody who you've got out working for you, who's currently working as a limited company, can they stay a limited company after April? And you need to move pretty quick if you haven't already done that, and get those assessments done in the next week or so. And if anybody's inside, then you need to crack on with finding what the solution to that is going to be.
Brilliant. You've been so helpful. Thank you, Carl. I hope everyone's found that as helpful as I have. I've learned so much just talking to you over the last few weeks about IR35.
Everyone's going to be good at something, right?
You're brilliant at it. And obviously, for anyone who's listening who wants information, I will connect you with Joel, and anyone who wants to talk to me about how we're dealing with IR35 and what we've put in place. We're partnering with Granite in order to make sure that any contractors that are working within IR35 who we deal with or who we deal with in the future will be well looked after. So thank you very much, Joel.
No, thank you.
And any questions, obviously, let us know.